History shifted today in a way few people were prepared for. At 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time on January 10th, 2026, a federal judge crossed a line that had never been crossed in the 249-year lifespan of the United States. Judge Tanya Chutkan formally referred evidence of criminal conduct by a former president directly to Congress and called for immediate impeachment proceedings. That point deserves emphasis. After reviewing the record, 14 documented violations of court orders, repeated witness intimidation, and clear obstruction of justice, a sitting federal judge concluded that congressional action could no longer be delayed. This is not rumor. This is not a leak. This is not unnamed sources whispering behind closed doors. It is a 47-page filing entered into the federal court record, publicly available as of today. And within roughly 72 hours, the House of Representatives is expected to vote on whether Donald Trump will become the first president in U.S. history to be impeached 3 separate times. I've been following this case closely for months. I said this moment was coming. I said the courts would eventually run out of patience, that defiance of judicial authority would carry consequences, and that the accountability process would finally begin to move. Today it did. Now I want to break down exactly what unfolded, why it matters, and what happens next. First, we need to be precise about today's events because precision matters here. Judge Tanya Chutkan oversees one of the federal criminal prosecutions involving Donald Trump. For months, she has confronted a situation without precedent. A criminal defendant who repeatedly ignores court orders, challenges judicial authority, and treats the legal process as optional. Court orders were ignored, gag orders were broken, witnesses were contacted despite explicit written prohibitions. Prosecutors, judges, and even potential jurors were targeted online, not once, not twice. 14 separate violations, all documented in the span of just 3 months. Each time the court escalated its response, warnings, contempt findings, monetary penalties, and each time the conduct continued. Today, Judge Chutkan stopped issuing warnings. Instead, she took the extraordinary step of filing a formal criminal referral. In plain terms, this is a judge telling Congress, I have reached the limit of my authority. This defendant poses an active threat to the justice system itself, and legislative action is now required. The language she used is not casual, and it is not symbolic. In her own words, the defendant's repeated violations constitute a clear and present danger to the administration of justice and demand immediate congressional intervention. Clear and present danger is not dramatic phrasing. It is a precise legal determination, one that carries immense institutional weight. And this was not a brief overview or a selective summary. Judge Chutkan transmitted the full evidentiary record, 14 separate gag order violations, each meticulously logged with timestamps, screenshots, and archival records. Transcripts from 7 distinct contempt hearings where Trump was personally warned by the court. Phone records demonstrating coordination with co-defendants in direct violation of no-contact orders. A trail of social media posts aimed at prosecutors, judges, and individuals within the jury pool. Internal communications from Trump's own legal team acknowledging the breaches. Sworn statements from former federal judges describing the conduct as without precedent in modern American jurisprudence. And then there is the most consequential evidence of all. Recorded audio, conversations in which Trump discusses plans to openly defy court orders with close advisors, evidence that goes beyond reckless behavior and directly establishes intent. This is the caliber of evidence that ends political careers, that brings down administrations, that fractures movements, and all of it was delivered to Congress in a single comprehensive 47-page filing, which brings us to why this moment stands apart from everything that has come before. This has never happened. Not during Watergate, when Richard Nixon openly resisted subpoenas, not during the Clinton impeachment, when obstruction of justice was fiercely debated, Not even during the Saturday night massacre, when a president fired the very prosecutors investigating him. At no point in American history has a sitting federal judge formally triggered impeachment proceedings against a president or former president. That boundary held for 249 years. Judge Chutkan crossed it because, in her assessment, the behavior before her left no alternative. And this did not catch Congress by surprise. To understand why Judge Chutkan took such an unprecedented step, you have to understand the constraints of the federal judiciary. Judges do not have unlimited power. When a defendant violates court orders, their options are narrow: issue warnings, levy fines, hold the defendant in contempt, or, in the most extreme situations, revoke pretrial release. But what happens when those tools fail? What happens when a defendant has the financial resources to absorb fines without consequence, the political stature that makes incarceration explosive, and the disposition to disregard warnings entirely? That is the position Judge Chutkan has been stuck in for months. Each violation raised the stakes. Each contempt ruling that failed to alter behavior chipped away at the court's authority. And Trump, and whether deliberately or by impulse, continued to press forward, testing the limits, daring the system to respond. He publicly named prosecutors. He commented on witnesses involved in active criminal proceedings. He circulated material capable of influencing jury pools. He maintained contact with co-defendants despite explicit court-ordered prohibitions. And when the court intervened, the behavior didn't stop. It repeated again and again. This is what sustained obstruction looks like: not a single lapse in judgment, not an isolated outburst, but a consistent pattern, intentional, ongoing, and thoroughly documented. And here is the point that often gets overlooked. Judicial authority only exists if it can be enforced. Court orders that carry no consequences are not orders at all. If one defendant can defy the court repeatedly without meaningful response, the legitimacy of the entire system erodes. Judge Chutkan recognized that continued restraint was no longer neutral. It was harmful. Each unaddressed violation sent a signal beyond this case, beyond this defendant, to every federal courtroom in the country. Compliance is optional. That realization forced escalation. The criminal referral was not a political act. It was an institutional one. It was a federal judge acknowledging the limits of her own power and stating plainly, "This conduct poses a threat I cannot contain. Congress holds the authority I lack, and it must act." And that shift is crucial because it dismantles the central defense Trump has relied on from the beginning. His argument has always been that this is political targeting. Partisan prosecutors, biased judges, and shadowy conspiracies working against him. That argument collapses the moment you look at who is making the accusation. This is not a partisan operative or a political rival. It is a lifetime appointed federal judge acting on sworn evidence. Judge Chutkan did not brief reporters. She did not go on television. She did not signal through leaks or proxies. She filed a formal legal submission in open court, attached the evidentiary record, and transmitted it through established judicial channels. That is not persecution. That is process. And once that process was triggered, Congress no longer had the option to ignore it, and Congress didn't. Within hours of Judge Chutkan's referral, lawmakers moved with unexpected speed. Draft articles of impeachment, prepared months earlier, were pulled from committee where they had been quietly sitting since November 2025. 8 charges were already outlined: obstruction of justice, witness tampering, contempt of court, violations of judicial orders, abuse of power, conduct unbecoming a public official, threats to the constitutional order, and incitement. Until today, those articles had roughly 87 co-sponsors, all Democrats, nowhere near enough to advance. By this evening, that number had surged to 231. That is a clear majority of the House of Representatives. That is enough to impeach immediately. And here's the part that stunned Capitol Hill. The new co-sponsors are not progressive Democrats from deep blue districts. They are moderate Republicans from competitive seats, lawmakers who had stood by Trump through 2 previous impeachments and are now breaking ranks. This morning, Representative Mike Lawler of New York stepped in front of cameras. He's a Republican representing a district that Joe Biden carried, and his words were unmistakable. He said, quote, "I took an oath to the Constitution, not to any one person. When a federal judge states that a former president is obstructing justice, that is something I am obligated to take seriously." Then came another break. Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska, also a Republican, publicly signaled his support. Another defection. And just like that, the political math changed. Democratic leadership isn't pausing to test the moment. They've activated Rule 99, Section 2, a rarely used fast-track mechanism that requires a full House vote within 72 hours. That motion was formally filed this morning, which means this is no longer theoretical. By Monday, January 13th, at the latest, the House of Representatives will hold a vote on whether Donald Trump becomes the first individual in American history to be impeached 3 times. 72 hours. That's the clock now. With 231 co-sponsors already on record, the numbers are brutal. Impeachment is no longer a matter of possibility. It's a matter of scale. Does it pass by a razor-thin 218 to 217 margin, or does it turn into a rout as more Republicans defect over the weekend? Because that list isn't static. It's expanding by the hour. Republicans who had been waiting for cover are stepping away in real time. They see a federal judge issue a criminal referral. They see a detailed evidentiary record documenting obstruction. They hear voters who are exhausted by endless turmoil, and they know they cannot credibly go on television defending witness tampering once a respected judge has put her name on a 47-page filing. The ground beneath the Republican Party has shifted, and Trump's reaction has only accelerated the collapse. Since yesterday afternoon, his Truth Social feed has been a near constant stream, all caps attacks on rigged courts, denunciations of so-called Obama judges, claims of persecution, and familiar conspiracy rhetoric. Then came a post that set off immediate alarms across Washington. He wrote, quote, "If Congress moves forward with this witch hunt, patriots must converge on Washington. The Second Amendment exists for moments like this." Read that again. A former president openly urging armed resistance against Congress. That is not campaign language. That is not rhetorical excess. Law enforcement is treating it as a credible threat. From this point forward, every public statement he makes is potential evidence. Every escalation strengthens the case against him. In real time, he is reinforcing the very arguments prosecutors have been building. Washington reacted immediately. National Guard units have been positioned throughout the Capitol complex. Steel barricades are going up around federal buildings. Pro-Trump demonstrators are assembling near the National Mall. Counter-protesters calling for accountability are gathering near the Supreme Court. The law enforcement presence is unmistakable. This is what the Capitol looks like right now. Not because of an election, not because of a foreign adversary, but because a former president is facing impeachment and has issued a call that authorities view as dangerous. Most coverage is locked onto the impeachment vote itself. Will it pass? How many Republicans break ranks? What happens next in the Senate? Those questions matter. But they are not the most consequential development unfolding. Here's what many people are overlooking. Judge Chutkan's referral did not stop at Congress. The same evidentiary record documenting witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and criminal contempt has also been transmitted to the Department of Justice. That changes the landscape entirely. This is no longer a purely political process. It is now running alongside an active criminal inquiry. If federal prosecutors determine that Trump coordinated directly with witnesses to influence testimony, that constitutes subornation of perjury, a serious federal crime. Witness tampering carries substantial prison exposure. Obstruction of justice does as well. Multiple federal grand juries are already operating in Washington, D.C., Miami, and Atlanta. That makes it entirely possible that additional criminal indictments could be handed down while Senate impeachment proceedings are still in progress. Pause on that for a moment. We could be watching a Senate trial unfold at the very same time a federal grand jury returns new criminal charges. Two tracks of accountability moving in parallel, neither waiting for the other. This is the kind of constitutional stress test the framers warned about. Mechanisms they deliberately built into the system, but hoped would never need to operate simultaneously. Impeachment in the House, trial in the Senate, criminal prosecution in federal court, all at once. And there is another development that, so far, is being discussed mostly in whispers. According to multiple reports, quiet conversations have already begun around the 25th Amendment. That amendment allows for removal without impeachment if a president is determined to be unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. It requires the vice president and a majority of the cabinet. And if invoked, it can move with extraordinary speed, potentially within hours. That option has remained largely theoretical for decades. It is no longer purely theoretical now. The mere fact that this option is being discussed tells you how grave officials believe the situation has become. To be clear, this is not a prediction that the 25th Amendment will be invoked. It is an acknowledgement that serious people inside government are talking about it, and that conversation alone is historically consequential. At the same time, the Republican Party is splintering in real time. On one side, loyalists like Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are entrenching themselves, urging demonstrations, offering unconditional defense of Trump, and aggressively attacking any Republican who steps out of line. On the other side are figures like Lawler and Bacon, choosing to break away and publicly grounding their decisions in their constitutional oaths rather than party allegiance. The internal pressure is intensifying. Republicans who defect have already become targets of harassment from Trump's base. The party's internal cohesion is fraying. With the 2026 midterm elections just 10 months away, many Republicans see disaster looming if they remain tethered to this level of instability. They are reassessing, repositioning, quietly mapping exit ramps. That is the deeper dynamic unfolding. This moment is larger than a single impeachment vote. It marks the potential unraveling of a political coalition that has shaped Republican politics for nearly a decade. Once defections happen openly, unity rarely snaps back into place. The first break weakens the structure. Each subsequent break accelerates the collapse. And the repercussions are not confined to U.S. borders. A former American president threatening armed resistance while facing impeachment is not a routine headline abroad. Allies are unsettled. Adversaries are paying close attention, measuring volatility, looking for openings. Internal instability always projects outward. And at this moment, to much of the world, the United States appears profoundly unstable. Now let's step back and consider what this means for ordinary Americans, not politicians, not lawyers, just regular people trying to make sense of what's happening to their country. First, the economy. Markets despise uncertainty, and few things create more uncertainty than a constitutional crisis unfolding live. Futures are already reacting. International investors are watching closely. When the world's largest economy looks politically unstable, capital shifts, interest rates can move, supply chains can tighten, hiring plans get put on hold. None of these outcomes is inevitable, but the likelihood rises sharply when the political system itself is consumed by crisis. Second, Trust, harder to measure, but perhaps even more consequential. How do you explain this moment to your children? A former president publicly urging armed resistance, National Guard troops stationed around the Capitol, a federal judge declaring that obstruction of justice has become so severe that Congress must act immediately. These events erode faith in institutions, shaking the belief that the system functions, that disputes can be resolved peacefully, and that the rule of law actually constrains power. Every generation of Americans eventually faces the question, is the Constitution just words on a page, or does it truly limit authority? Right now, the country is being tested in exactly that way. Third, safety. The National Guard isn't being deployed as a precaution, it's being deployed because authorities believe the threat is real. The memory of January 6th isn't theoretical, it's operational. Agencies know what happens when incendiary rhetoric turns into action. They watched a mob storm the Capitol in real time, and they are determined not to be caught unprepared again. For people in Washington, federal employees, Capitol staff, families living near government buildings, the next 72 hours will be tense. Security checkpoints, street closures, helicopter noise piercing the night. This is the human side of a constitutional crisis. It's not cable news drama. It's people canceling plans, keeping kids home from school, worrying about whether their commute will be safe. Fourth, the future. Whatever happens Monday, the political terrain has already shifted permanently. If Trump is impeached for a third time, he will become a historical figure, defined less by policy and more by repeated accountability proceedings. If he is acquitted in the Senate, he remains politically viable but legally vulnerable, with federal criminal cases continuing irrespective of congressional outcomes. Either way, the next several years are likely to be consumed by trials, appeals, investigations, and ongoing instability. There is no simple return to normal, only moving forward through whatever comes next. So what could happen from here? Let's outline the possible scenarios for the coming weeks, not as predictions, but as plausible developments based on what we know today.